Note, this video only goes over content you can see within the first several hours of the game, so as long as you've made it past the tutorial sections, you should be fine for spoilers. Hey, it's PK Beats. I am really glad that the last one of these got enough support to warrant turning this into a series. A series where I just talk about things that I learned or noticed through using Tears of the Kingdom to study the Japanese language. I've got over 2,500 hours or so worth of experience in studying, so I know a pretty good amount of things, but obviously I still have a lot left to learn, hence the point of continuing my studying. That is to say, this is not meant to be a professional stance on really anything, and just comes from the perspective of someone who is making observations during his study sessions. I do try to put in research when I can, but usually can only go so far. As always, I welcome people to leave additional information that I may have missed down in the comments. Starting off, you know how everyone in Hyrule is calling this event the Upheaval? I think it works well enough. It's not like I think it's as unfitting as Gloom was for the Miasma Malice stuff. Though at the same time, I do think its upheaving connotations puts a bit too much focus on Hyrule Castle and the Sky Islands, of which only the former was really upheaved. The latter was there from the start, and if anything, they came down. But regardless, it works well enough to get the idea across that a big change happened, and that potential wordplay with the literal upheaval of the land is there to an extent, so it's cool. But I was really interested when I found out that, in Japanese, they used the word tenpenchi for this. Now, from what I'm gathering, this word is technically just a combination of two somewhat similar words, those being tenpen and chi. So let's look at these components first. Tenpen comes from the kanji of ten, which means sky or heavens, and hen, which generally means strange or unusual or whatever, and in combination would roughly mean a strange phenomenon that occurs in the sky. Or you can replace sky with heavens, that idea. Examples being a solar eclipse, a lunar eclipse, lightning, or powerful gusts of wind, and can apparently also refer to dangerous weather as well, like heavy rain or snow. And chi comes from the kanji chi, which means ground or earth, and I, which also kind of means strange or unusual or different. And this would roughly mean a strange phenomenon that occurs on the earth. Examples being an earthquake, an eruption, a flood, so a lot more immediately focused on natural disasters. So it's a bit different from a solar eclipse, I guess. So if we were to get really blunt and literal with it, we could say that this whole word means a strange phenomenon that occurs both in the sky and on the earth. Though obviously the connotations are more important for this type of thing, and those examples I gave before are necessary to think of. I'm describing all of this the way I am just to help you get a good understanding of what this term means from a more literal, foundational perspective. I then found this article about the phrase, and it even had a small section about how one could describe this word in English, which I'm sure is what you're most curious about. Since that phrasing from before is it's a bit of a mouthful all on its own, isn't it? So just natural disaster does seem to work. Or a convergence of natural disasters as they propose, which would make sense because the word involves both the sky and the ground, though they do seem to think that just natural disaster is okay. Though it also brings up the idea of a cataclysm into the mix. So the former translation would put more focus on the natural disaster idea specifically, obviously, and the latter is more broad, focusing just on the strange phenomenon aspect. To go back to my last video briefly, and how the word gloom probably should just be called miasma, which apparently is called that in every other language like German, Italian, French, and many others, and is apparently also called that in the game's code. I know some people didn't like the idea of using miasma for this, but whatever. Anyways, the word miasma, or its Japanese word shoki, had connotations that felt very natural almost. How it can spread contagious diseases, right? Now, a quick addendum I need to make regarding the Japanese word shoki is that its use can focus more so on the spiritual definition of ki, something you might already be familiar with if you watch a lot of anime. Think of the Chinese ki, which is the vital energy that forms any living entity. Now, I don't know if there are any significant cultural nuances between the Chinese and Japanese use of this concept, but the idea still seems pretty similar, as I'm sure you can imagine. Not only is it a very good word for Scrabble, apparently, but it's also used a lot in Japanese phrases. Kiotsukeru generally means be careful or pay attention. But here the verb tsukeru, a verb that can have a lot of nuanced meanings, can take on the idea of keeping something close, or to even put on something. So by, applying your ki, you're enhancing your awareness. And so many other phrases use the word ki in this kind of way. It's actually super interesting. I kept the description of this kanji way too simple in my last video, since I wasn't sure which balance I wanted to strike between just being thorough with the language, or being just approachable and focusing on the basic ideas. Going forward, I'm definitely going to try and be more descriptive with things than I was in that first attempt. So really, more literally, Shoki can be used as a malicious or miasmic ki, or demonic spiritual energy. And the reason why it hurts you is because it, like, plagues or damages your own ki or your own spiritual energy. A concept that's very fitting for Ganondorf, perhaps even more so than just the traditional idea of miasma given its spiritual connotations. Though I do think even miasma has some spiritual connotations in and of itself, so it works out. Though it is still used in contexts where said bad ki can cause fevers or diseases or other similar effects, I did not pull that out of thin air. That's a pun. I guess it's just a different perspective of cause. And honestly, the idea of air and ki are kind of intertwined if you really think about it anyways. Like, we need air to live and not die, so it's kind of like a life force. But regardless, the spread of disease is still a very natural phenomenon, right? So that paired with how the upheaval is given a name that more strongly resembles that used for natural disasters, really gives Ganondorf's power a different presence to it. He's not just letting out some sad magic, it's almost like he's at a level of power and influence that rivals even nature itself. Like, Ganondorf himself is a natural disaster. And that's really cool. On top of the fact that this term just is true. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the sky did become strange. There's islands in it. And yeah, the land did become strange. There's holes in it. And also a lot of other regions are undergoing their own strange phenomena. Though again, the term upheaval does have a broad enough definition to where it can also include these. Given that the bad stuff in Breath of the Wild was called a calamity, I think calling this something like a cataclysm would have been pretty cool too. But really, no matter which way you cut it, I don't think there's a good way to cover all of the bases like is done in Japanese. So really, it's just something that's good to learn about and keep in mind. I'm very interested to hear about what other languages did to refer to this event. So as usual, feel free to comment your own insights into that if you have played through the game in a different language. I really love being able to hear about that sort of thing. It's actually really nice. Now I don't have to, like, spend thousands of hours learning other languages, huh? Okay, next. So we all know about the hot-footed frog, right? It's among the first things you'd be able to pick up on the Great Sky Island. Its speed boosting effect is subtly echoed in its hot-footed name. You know, hot-footed. It's fast. That's what it is. Well, in Japanese, it's named the Go-Go Gairu, or more literally, Go-Go Frog. I feel like you don't even need an etymological explanation for this one. The go-go idea gives you the connotation of someone urging you on, or you know, just getting going, being high in energy in that idea. Though the Japanese word seems to more directly refer to the go-go subgenre of funk and that style of dance and all of that. Either way, it's a very apt method to get the idea across that this is a speed boosting thing. Very cool. Another thing you can get here is a mushroom called the rushroom. It's got rush in the name, another way to describe something moving fast, and sounds very close to mushroom. A very creative naming scheme for a mushroom that gives off speed boost properties. And its name in Japanese is the Go-Go Dake, or more literally, the Go-Go Shroom. Okay, oh yeah, the hightail lizard. Now there's another staple critter to get. It's hightail, like when you hightail at home, so another unique way to describe something moving fast. And it fits pretty well for lizard, right? Like it has tail in the name. If you hadn't heard this use of hightail before, you'd probably even miss that it was a pun like that. And its name in Japanese is the Go-Go Tokage, or the Go-Go Lizard. Yeah, I'm starting to see a trend. Yep, basically, whenever an ingredient of any kind has the ability to give off a property when cooked, it uses the same word in the naming scheme for all of those ingredients. So for speed here, we had go-go, like we just saw. For cold resistance, you have poka-poka, an onomatopoeic word for pleasantly warm. For stealth, you have shizuka, which literally just means quiet or silent, or can be calm or peaceful. And for stamina replenishing ingredients, you've got the prefix gambari, coming from the verb gambaru, which means to persist or keep at it. Okay, to give a very basic idea, usually when a verb goes from its dictionary form to ending with an I sound, like this, and stays on its own without further additional endings, that sort of nounifies the verb. I'm sure there's a technical name for it, but if gambaru means to endure, then gambari would just mean endurance, that kind of thing. So gambari dake would just be endurance shroom. The specific wording chosen likely because the stamina meter is called the gambari gauge. So the gambari here would be the stamina idea, which means it makes a lot of sense that in English, instead of going the endurance shroom route like I more literally translated here, they instead based the pun around the word stamina, which was a good choice. Slight tangent, but while I know that gum buddy, like I've been describing, would have a simple meaning of endurance, I hear the verb form used so often in a manner like do your best, in that kind of vibe, that hearing it for the stamina meter kind of makes it feel like it's Link's doing his best meter, which is just kind of cute. That's not like a factual thing. I don't even know how like Japanese folks themselves would interpret that, but that's just what I thought, and I thought that was funny. So anyways. Going back to this whole naming scheme thing, I'm not going to list off every example right now. At some point I do think I'll work on a spreadsheet listing every single thing in the compendium in its Japanese names with notes and thoughts. Maybe that'll even be an entire video, but since I'm still a pretty good ways away from completing the compendium in the first place, that'll be for much later. And yeah, I know I could just look up the completed compendiums anyways, but I'm trying to have fun with the game, alright? But what I want to focus on is the idea of a consistent naming scheme. Because again, going back to that introductory section, the English names were clearly a lot more diverse, right? Like sure, you could also find a common ground pun related to the idea of going fast, but it was still unique every time. This kind of left me torn. On one hand, it's just more interesting for creature or plant names to be diverse. Rather than attaching the same noun or adjective to everything based on its effects as an ingredient, trying to give species more distinction while still incorporating clever wordplay into their true effects is honestly something I really like. But at the same time, there's something to be said about the profound clarity that the naming scheme in Japanese gives. The moment you pick up something new and see that word at the front, you can tell exactly what effect that ingredient will be giving you. And even if it's your first time seeing that effect in general, you're still able to assume a lot. No chance for wordplay to be lost on the player, they're not forced to read the flavor text for every single ingredient, they just know instantly. And this does even have an effect on dialogue at certain points. I think of the construct by the entrance of the cold section on the Great Sky Islands. In English, the construct states that the meals that warmed their masters were created using ingredients with warm-sounding names. Advice that's just kinda weird. Hey, wait a second. Hot-footed has the word hot in it. That's a warm-sounding name, right? And actually, no, wait a second. The sun shroom here gives off the warming effect because it has the word sun in the name. So surely the Sundelian would follow the same logic, wouldn't it? Now, okay, I'm not stupid. Obviously, the item descriptions do all of the work necessary to describe what the item's effect really is. But you can see how there's a lot less clarity in the naming scheme, to the point where the construct's advice here isn't as incredibly helpful. Focusing on the name isn't really enough for these things. If you want to be certain of an ingredient's effect, you're gonna have to read the description, just to be sure. But in Japanese, the construct instead says, ingredients with poka poka in the name, and so on and so on. Remember that onomatopoeic word we went over from before. Nothing vague or ambiguous. If an ingredient has poka poka in the name, it gives off a cool resistance effect when cooked. This is consistent for everything in the game. I am curious about everyone's thoughts on this, if you prefer the more diverse and unique naming scheme the English language went with, or if you would have preferred something with more consistency and clarity like in Japanese. Personally, I like elements of both, so I honestly can't really decide. Actually, okay, pardon this upcoming rant, but one thing that this makes me think about is a topic I saw come up a lot in the comments of my last video. That being, how much should a localization change about the original game? Now, it's easy to get mad at localization teams when a word like gloom is used even when other cooler options were not only available but probably more fitting, and I still think that these types of things are worth criticizing. But I see a lot of people who seem intent that this level of creative change is basically always bad, so long as it's different enough from the source material. Obviously, some change is inevitable given the differences between the languages, that is literally the definition and point of a localization, being the changes to make something more suited for whatever culture it's being brought into. But I've been told pretty often by people who speak languages like German, French, Italian, etc., that they're more faithful than English seems to be. Not to say those localizations are always perfect, but the idea of certain languages being seen as quote-unquote more faithful at the very least tells us that there are levels to the amount of change that can be made, right? It's something I'm still struggling with right now, honestly. Especially as someone who would like to have a career in translation or localization at some point in his life, maybe? On one hand, I feel like the internet is already full enough of people who act like experts in fields they have zero experience in, yet you don't really have to be a professional translator to judge certain decisions, especially if you speak both languages, right? You're allowed to have opinions on this type of thing. Hell, if people within the language and culture you're localizing into think a decision was weird, then wouldn't that go against the purpose of it? But at the same time, I do think there are a lot of people who are too critical of localization teams, in ways that aren't really that warranted. There's one particular example of a quote-unquote localization failure that I see spread a lot that likely isn't even accurate, as we're gonna touch up on in my next video, hint hint. So I can understand why some folk are wary of these localization critics in that regard. But I'm mostly just bringing this up because the series is me ranting about my thoughts as I go through the process of studying anyways, as not only is this a topic that deserves its own video, but it's also one I'm not entirely sure I should even make given my lack of experience in the field. But the fundamental question of how much should a localization be allowed to change is still a pretty interesting one that people are able to weigh in on. So I guess give me your thoughts on that down below. As for me, I'm just going to keep treating it on a case-by-case basis. If there's a decision that I don't personally agree with, I'll say that, but if there's a decision that I really like or understand, I'll also say that. And generally, I'm just gonna try and stay away from those "the localization team sucks" type of claims, because ever since I learned about that thing that, again, is gonna be the focus of my next video, I've personally grown a lot more conscious of that rhetoric. Even if I may sometimes come across as critical, I really don't want this series to be a bash of localization teams. It's really just a comparison, and sometimes the act of comparing things makes it sound like I'm criticizing them, but I just kinda wanna make observations and make these comparisons to learn more. What you take away from these comparisons is just up to you. Yeah, I know that that's a bit of a wishy-washy stance to spend like 3 minutes talking about, but that's fine. For an example of an English creative liberty that I enjoy is the rupee flavor text. In Japanese, they're super duper simple. It just describes the rupee's color, then says it makes you happy. The extent of which it makes you happy is changed depending on the value of the rupee, but regardless, overall they read to me as pretty normal. But in English, while they do follow a similar idea, they get a bit more creative with it, in my opinion. Okay, actually just watch my reaction to actually reading the blue rupee description for the first time. Makes you weak in the knees. That's funny. I didn't know it said that. I'm sorry. But weak in the knees? That's just hysterical. Okay, that's just hysterical. A lot of these descriptions feel delightfully over the top. It's not like anything of value was really lost, and instead it just made me laugh and made me happy. And that is pretty awesome. Speaking of being happy, I'm happy you made it this far into the video. Unfortunately though, I think I'm gonna end it there. As usual, if you have any questions or things you yourself have learned in regards to this topic, please let me know down in the comments. There's a handful of questions that I get a lot that I am absolutely going to cover eventually. One of which I've already not so subtly hinted at as being the main focus for my next video. Like, seriously, the reason why this took longer than usual to get out is because I finished the script for that other video while I was working on this one. I just got really carried away in the topic. So yeah, look forward to that whenever it comes out. And other questions I commonly get veer more into spoiler territory, something I'm still trying to avoid. I think I can get another 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 episodes going over things at around the same spoiler level as I have been doing right now, but I think by the time those are all done is when I can start opening up my content to the whole world of the game, with minor story spoilers. So look forward to that. And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on one of those uploads. This is a very new format of content for this channel, so I imagine the videos will be pretty slow to start once uploaded. So by subscribing and supporting me in any way you can, you'll greatly increase the chances that you'll not only be recommended a new episode, but that those episodes will do well enough to continue to warrant me making more of them. And that is a win-win, I hope. Seriously, I just want to take the time to really thank you all for the support on my last video. My channel has been kind of notorious for having its non-Smash videos do very poorly relative to everything else, so seeing an upload that's not only in a new video game series, and also my favorite video game series, but is focused around a topic that I've been studying about for most of my free time for the past 2 years is so gratifying. I don't know how long I can keep up this specific series going. I think I will hit a wall on Japanese trivia way earlier for this game than I did for general trivia in Smash Ultimate. But really, if you consider my channel as a fun and casual trivia channel with language tidbits included, you'll get a good idea of what I like to do. Meaning, I do think it'd be cool to do non-language trivia at some point, but I don't know, right now I want to focus on language because that's like cool and fun. So I hope you all had and will continue having a good time learning about things and stuff. And thank you for watching. Also, I thank you to my glorious patrons Raighne, Sylvan700, Burbo, and everyone else for their support. Stay casual, and I'll see y'all later.